Good afternoon, everyone. This is a public meeting of the Indiana Arts Commission. Today, we're reviewing On-Ramp 2021 local fellowship proposals for the Marion cohort. I'm Maya Michelson, Executive Director of the Indiana Arts Commission. Today's Monday, October 18th, 2021. The panelists are meeting on Zoom and the public is observing via YouTube. So we're going to take a moment and ask the panelists and staff to introduce themselves, stating their name, occupation, and where they're currently located. And Ailey, I'm going to ask you to go first.
Excellent. I'm Ailey McGill, and I'm the Executive Director of Nickel Plate Arts in Noblesville, and I've been assisting the IAC with this Marion cohort for the last month or so, helping the applicants get their applications in, and now helping reviewers make sense of this process. So I'm going to tap Rachel to go next.
Hi, thank you, Ailey. My name is Rachel Sahadachny, and I'm the Executive Director of the Indiana Writer Center, which is located in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I will tap on Nick to go next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Gonzalez. I am currently the Community Engagement and Education Manager for the Stanford Symphony based in Stamford, Connecticut. But don't worry, I was born and raised in Indiana, so still got Hoosier blood all through here. I will pass this over to Tiara.
Thank you. I'm Tiara Deacon. I work at the Carnegie Center for Art and History as a museum educator, and I am currently located in Louisville, Kentucky, but I frequent New Albany. And I am going to call on Shamira next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shamira Wilson, and I'm an Indianapolis-based interdisciplinary visual artist and also a beginning botanist. And I work in the mediums of wood, paint, and sculpture.
And Chapin.
Hey there, Chapin Schnick, and I'm the Contracts, Operations, and IT Assistant at the Arts Commission, and today I'm just here in a tech role.
Welcome, everyone. So this panel is designed to gather feedback that will help the applicants strengthen their fellowship project to advance their career. The discussion will also help us identify any important modifications applicants may be required to make to their fellowship project before moving forward. So here's how it'll work. First, I'll announce the application we'll review. I'll ask the first reader to begin the discussion. And the first reader's role is to provide advice to strengthen the fellowship project, focusing on the evaluation criteria from their perspective. Panelists, please know that the applications don't need to be recapped because everyone's read them. Just provide your comments. And then after the first reader is finished, I'll ask for the second reader to present any new, additional, or differing comments. We're not looking for consensus here. We just want the applicant to receive the excellent advice from these fantastic folks that we have on the panel today. And once the second reader is finished, I'll open the discussion for any final comments. Remember, in the interest of time, we're only looking for new, additional, or differing viewpoints. If a panelist has a conflict of interest, that panelist will be placed in the virtual waiting room while the application is discussed. And we have a couple of conflicts of interest, but those don't come until the end of the panel discussion today. Finally, once the application has been discussed by the full panel, the panelists will have an opportunity to update any comments they may want to make in the online system. It's common sometimes for a comment from one panelist to spur an idea in another panelist, and they may want to add those comments to their online evaluation. And the changes save automatically in the online system, so panelists don't have to worry about that. Any questions? All right, hearing none, then let's begin. So first, we'll start with the applicant, Angelita Hampton. First reader for Angelita's application is Nick Gonzalez. Nick, I'll hand it to you.
All righty, thank you. So I just wanted to start off by saying what I really liked about this application, that is in the goals, everything was very clear, and it's clear how this project is gonna impact this applicant's career. Also, the work samples that they provided were both really interesting and high quality. So I really appreciated seeing that in their application. Overall, I think the applicant has everything right there. It's just making sure that everything's in the right areas For example, in the budget narrative, they didn't show any community engagement activities, but in their project description, they talked a lot about community engagement. So I wasn't sure where that budget is being allocated for. Continuing on to the budget, I liked how the expenses equaled the income. But again, because I wasn't sure where community engagement came into this, I wasn't sure if the budget should have been larger. And just for the applicant's knowledge, it's okay if the project budget goes over $2,000, just as long as you make sure that every dollar is accounted for. And then onto the community engagement portion, I thought that the applicant did a really good job of showing how they're going to engage in their community. And I really wanted them to talk more about how this was going to build a community of artists, which is what they said like this project could really do a lot of. So I just was looking for a little more of that need and that impact. Because that was one of the things I loved about this application is that this magazine it's just such a cool project, such an important project. It has such a great purpose, but I didn't really feel much of a need from their application. I think I can derive the need just being based in that area and knowing that area. But you know, for an outsider who might not know the area very well, a clear description of that need would have made it better. But again, this is a great project. They have all the materials there. It's just making sure everything has that through line and everything is in every part of the application.
Great, thanks, Nick. Second reader for this application is Tara. Tara.
All right. Well, I think Nick covered a lot of this application. So one thing that I did note looking at the application was there's a section where different dates are listed out, the timelines given, and there's a little bit of confusion there. At one point, the date end for the project is listed as November 30th, and then the last date in the timeline is July. So that causes a little bit of confusion. So if that could be clarified, that would be helpful. Add a little bit of context between those two dates, or maybe pick which one or the other as the specific end date. But other than that, I think all the other feedback was covered by Nick.
Thank you, Tara. Just as a side comment, there was a discrepancy in the application. The application initially announced that the project period was going to start, I believe, in September 1 and end August 30th. But in fact, the timeline runs from January 1 of 2022 to December 31st. So just a note to panelists, you may see some discrepancy related to dates. Go ahead and bring it up, but just know that more than likely that discrepancy was some confusion that we created on our end by having incorrect dates in the grant program guidelines. So, but yeah, great comments. Thank you. Anything else? Any other panelists would like to say around Angelina's proposal?
Something that I thought could be beneficial for this proposal was for the applicant to have more detail pertaining to the specifics of the magazine, like how many pages would be in each issue, maybe having a rough layout design before they go into production with the zine, just to make things more streamlined and easier. And also that would give her an idea of how much paper and ink she might need. That might influence the sales and the profit. And also when it came to community engagement, let me see what I left in my comments. I think that the application mentions surrounding area, but she might want to define that a little bit more, just so she can have an idea of who she's actually communicating with.
Great, thank you, Shamira. Any other comments? Okay, well, hearing none, take a second. If you need to update any comments about Angelita's application proposal in the online system, go ahead. And then we'll move on to our next application, which is Braxton Moore. And first reader for that one is Rachel.
I appreciated on this application that the artist put a lot of detail into their the section which describes their goals and their artistic work, and in specific details even about this project. That helped me really understand their vision and what they were doing, and how what they're doing right now is going to be, you know, translated into the future. That also helped me when I got to the artistic sample, because the artist did such a great job of explaining to me the purpose behind their work. And when I could look at their work, I could see, then I felt introduced to it already, you know, so I knew that I could explore it in the way that they had introduced it to me. Feasibility, I thought that the timeline was pretty clear. It was bullet pointed out, which I liked compared to some other applications. Sometimes you had to search for the dates, but this one, it was very clear with the bullets and the planning needs that would go into each step. I don't think I had any comments specifically about the budget. And then the community part was where I felt it was least developed in this application. It just hadn't been very explored in here, I think. It was like, oh, I'd like to have a gallery space or some staff for feedback or interact with people, but there wasn't like that direct plan for community engagement, or maybe an understanding of the process of how to find those people to, you know, to develop their plan with even. So I would definitely recommend just thinking about that in some ways, and especially because the goals list was actually pretty extensive. So and that might be a good place to look at the goals list and say, okay, if I were to work towards achieving this goal, where would I find that in the community? Where could I find the people that would understand that or be able to help me, or where I could create relationships in the community to get closer to that goal?
That's great, Rachel. Thank you. Any other comments, Rachel? I want to make sure I didn't jump in.
No, I think that's it for that one.
Right, thanks. Second reader is Shamira. Shamira.
Thank you. One of my comments was pertaining to the section for long-term creative career or creative business goals. I thought it could be beneficial for the artist to kind of have whether it's like a month listed next to it, or a year, or some sort of date, so that we know like the chronological order of when they'd like to see those goals accomplished and how that could influence their project. Also, let's see, for the goals feedback, that was goals feasibility. I would have liked to have seen more details about the sales and numbers of running an art business. That's something that might not be able to be fleshed out at this stage, but that's definitely something that can impact the sustainability of an art practice, and how are you going to thrive and continue to earn an income if you want to become full-time. How many pieces do you need to make? How much time are you going to need to spend on each part of your art practice? How many sales? How much networking will you have to do? Just quantifying things a little bit more.
That's great. Thank you, Shamira. Any additional comments from other panelists on this application proposal?
So I actually did have an additional comment. So this, I think, is just kind of a proofreading issue. So, you know, just a quick look back over your application after you finished it to make sure that everything kind of makes sense. So in the total in-kind section, for the actual large section where you can write out things, it says not applicable or in/A, but then the total in-kind amount is listed as $2,000. So it's just one of those things, just going back and checking through that you'll be able to catch. But
Thanks for that note, Tiara. I should have caught that before they went through, and my eyes skipped right over that $2,000. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say just on that, because I wasn't sure as the reviewer if they were assuming the IEC grant was the in-kind donation. And so if they assume that, then make sure that that's actually as part of your income and not your in-kind. But if your in-kind is that, if you know what in-kind is and what that $2,000 is made of, just make sure you really describe that. I had a couple of other comments just on the, one on the goals and then one on community engagement. With the goals, just making sure that when it comes to, I think it was the actual project itself, it's very clear what your goals are and it doesn't kind of get lost in the narrative. Just because as a reviewer, if you start to go into too much background information, I might lose where the actual goal is. Which for you, I think for this applicant, it was in like the third paragraph, and that should have been at like, first. Just saying, like, it was a lot of great background information, and also great images in those work samples, which were just very beautiful. But just being very concise, so that way the reviewer doesn't get confused. Also, just piggyback on community engagement. I think it was Rachel who gave a great summary of all my thoughts as well, but just wanted to give a couple more examples of like, is there a way the exhibit could have been interactive, or can you show how your style of art is either addressing a community need, or is your kind of artwork filling some sort of gap in the art community? Can you do any like classes or pre-exhibit work to get people excited about your artwork? Those are just other ideas to bring home that idea of community engagement.
Great comments. Love the dialogue here. Any other comments on this application? Fantastic. Thank you, guys. If you take a second, just if you've got any final comments or feedback on this application. If not, we'll move on to the next one. So our next application is Kathy Jane Shouse. Shamira, you're the first reader on that one.
Thank you. And I'm having trouble starting my video. Otherwise, I'd pop on here, so I'll still be off screen for a bit. Let's see. For Shouse, I was very excited to hear that the artist was going to continue writing and that they were passionate about their craft. I would have liked to have heard more about how the artist is going to build onto their short-term goals and to continue writing or publishing their work. How would they logistically continue the momentum towards reaching a more expansive audience outside of their community or their county? And how many print editions were they going to create, and how would they be available to the public to purchase or to view? I think the creative goals are feasible. Again, I wanted to know more about the long-term goals and reaching more audiences outside of their community and making the book available to the public. And that kind of leads to community engagement. I thought maybe they could expand their reach by connecting with other outlets in addition to libraries, such as public media, like maybe WFYI, local state fairs, with more rural audiences, podcasts, online outlets, and maybe even book clubs to talk about their book.
Thanks so much, Shamira. Next reader is Rachel.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I also was excited that it was a new direction for the artist in terms of their writing career. I thought that in the individual goals, there was a lot of information about the community and the community impact, which perhaps if it had been moved down into the community section would have given more room for a little more development of individual goals in the individual section. For example, making the change from having, built the nonfiction writing career and changing to fiction, that's, a very interesting step. And I was curious about a little bit more about the reason of that for the future on her personal goals. And just like Shamira was saying, how that might be expanded beyond just this one book. And then it looked like part of the process was working with the book editing professional. So what would the long-term, how does that affect long-term writing goals? And I also agreed about more metrics about the desired audience and how to reach those audiences beyond just the extremely local community would be interesting for professional goals. The budget section was a little bit confusing. I think that this one, they weren't matching exactly, like this was just kind of a clerical stuff, maybe like what's listed in the projected cash cash expenses was matching to 2000, but then the cash income didn't include all of the income that the writer or the artist was expecting. So then that made, but it also in the total income didn't list the proper amount. So there was just some fine tuning work to be done there in the budget section to make sure that the totals match each other and that the expense and the income are both all reflective of all the funds that are being used. And then I think again in the community section, I just was curious about more specifics of, how, in hopes for this goal to reach beyond the direct community, because I was speaking to how to kind of uplift the community and create an appreciation for life in a small town. And so what do those goals look like? Like, how do you get that appreciation from outside of the direct community? Was just, I kind of was reiterating on that one.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Additional comments on this application?
One note on the budget as well. Just making sure when you are creating a budget that it's just very direct and there's not possibilities of things. So for example, in your in-kind donations, which if the library does provide a space for the public for free, that is an in-kind donation. So just make sure you put a dollar amount on that, even if it's not 100% confirmed. Just having it on there just shows that you're likely going to have something like that. Also with the budget, just making sure that whatever application you're applying for, it's always helpful to know whether you should show a surplus or whether it's supposed to zero out on your budget. I think for the purposes of the IAC fellowship program, the budgets are supposed to zero out. But just know that, you're reading the criteria for grants carefully, because if you show a budget on some grant applications, they automatically won't award you funding, or just might take that in consideration as they're thinking about that. I also just wanted to say that, with community engagement, you have a lot of great ideas, and this is such a fantastic way to engage your community and have an impact. But I think, like I said on the previous application, just making sure you're thinking about the needs of your community. I feel like it's there, that you are thinking about it. That's why this project exists, but just making sure it's absolutely clear in your description, so that way I don't have to think about that a little more. As the reviewer, you just want to make sure everything is there, so the reviewer doesn't have to think of other ways to make your application stronger. But it was already strong. These are just like small nitpicky things that I thought would just make it even stronger.
That's great. Thanks, Nick. Any additional comments on this application? Okay, well, hearing none, if you take a second and just finalize any additional comments that you've got. Our next application is Sierra Johnson. And Rachel, you are the first reviewer for that one.
Okay. This one, in the beginning of this application, I struggled to kind of understand the scope of what was going on. There were sentences I was like, oh, I'm interested to understand that, and I understood the broader themes, but there wasn't, for me, it was very abstract in the description of the creative work and the description of the goals. I wasn't sure what medium I was working in, and I just really was hoping for some more concrete descriptions that would anchor me into the artist's work here better instead of the broader abstracts. I like seeing some of those too, but I struggled to understand what the project specifically was. My comment, I do think the long-term goals felt very energized and concise, and a lot of thought went into what it means to be an active artist in a thriving community. But in the project goal, there isn't a lot of detail about tangible results, goals of how many audiences would be reached, or the specific project benefits the long-term artistic goals. And then also, it seemed like there was a desire for pathways into the larger art market, but I still wasn't sure in the project goals how it was creating that. But that seemed to be like the main goal for it. So I just, a little more concrete information there. And then, sorry, I wrote a lot of comments there, so I'm just trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. I guess I put also more information about how the artist plans to meet the public with this project. Like there's mention of an apparel launch and a desire to sell some products, but it wasn't clear to me if that would be in galleries or online, or which avenues would be used for that specifically. And then the timeline, I'm down in the feasibility section now. It was very, it's very like a sketch kind of. It wasn't filled out that much. A few more details about partnerships, tools, vendors, things that would make it come to life a bit better, and provide just knowledge that the artist does have a grasp on how much work each of those, like it was even just by the month, and it's like, well, that each month seems like a lot of work what's listed. So maybe a little bit more detail about the work that would go into each of those months. The community engagement was pretty underdeveloped. And in fact, I think the artist maybe had trouble expressing specific community engagement goals, because I think it kind of repeated itself a couple of times here. So there was a little bit of mentioning about some specific organizations that they would be able to relate to, like the storefront theater, but maybe what would that look like, and how many people are you expecting, and what do you do beyond just that? But I mean, I thought there was a lot of, there is definitely some work being done there, but just a little bit more concrete details in general in the application, I think, would have helped me to engage with it better and stay focused on the end results that are being expected.
Thanks, Rachel. Appreciate that. Tiara, you are the second reader for this one.
Thank you. So I think I'm gonna start kind of at the end with the community engagement and then go back into it. A thing that I noted with the community engagement is that the response to the 2 community engagement questions at the end are both the same. So I don't know if it was like an accidental copy paste, but it's clear to me from earlier in the application that the applicant is passionate about their community. So I'd love to see them go back into that and really have that continue to shine through the application. In the, let's see, in the feasibility section, oh, actually, with the budget, I would like some more explanation into the budget. Things like, are the models for the clothing being paid? Are they voluntary models? How many pieces are you going to have for sample and for stock? Just things that give me a little bit more clarity on how exactly that money is being spent in relation to your project would be really great to see. And then in your goals section, again, I could definitely feel the passion about your project and about your community. But as somebody who doesn't know your community from like an outsider's perspective, I had a couple questions, like when you say that there's an untapped demographic, a little bit of an explanation to me who that is would be fantastic. You mentioned like the significance of the East Side. As someone not from that area, I'm not quite sure what that is. Just a little bits and pieces of explanation on some of the context that somebody that isn't in your community wouldn't necessarily know would be fantastic. And that is it for my comments.
Thanks, Tiara. Other comments from other panelists on this application?
I had a few comments just on the sustainability of a fashion-based business. I know that sometimes they can be very difficult to thrive and be sustainable. So I thought I'd like to hear more about how they plan to continue this long-term. Just some details like the financial side of it. How are they going to take care of wholesaling, or do they have an understanding of how that process works? Also, I was thinking about how are they going to manage inventory and handle some of the details like that.
Right. Thanks, Shamira. Other comments? Okay, hearing none, if you take a couple of seconds just to add any additional comments you might have for this application, we will go on to the next one. Okay, the next application is Claire Longendijk. Tiara, you're the first reader for this one.
So I thought that this was an incredibly strong application. The plans or the project seemed incredibly planned out. I loved that the applicant already knew what label or what company they wanted to put out their CD with, and just like very concrete goals. I really myself didn't have anything to suggest or add for this particular application. I felt like I had a very good, clear understanding of the project from reading this application.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tiara. Nick.
Yes, I also agree. This is a really, really strong application. I don't have many notes for the first two, except for that just also a high quality work sample. Love the work sample that was there. I think it was 13 or 15 minutes on the video. So just remember, we only watch up to I think 10 minutes in this case. So just making sure whatever you select for your work sample, which in this case was still really good, just fits the criteria for that. I thought, and the other comment I have is as it relates to community engagement, which I think you're heading in the right direction, but just can fine tune it a little. Just kind of remember that marketing and sales is not always community engagement, and utilizing on your current network, just expanding on that a little more, because I was curious to know how you're going to allow your audience to participate in your creative aspect of this. Are you going to do like live performances so they can get to know you? Are you going to allow them to like choose what goes on the label, or provide some education and preparation for the album? So just really thinking about the audience development aspect of this. And then as it goes into the how will help you reach your goals, you start to mention it, but I think you could talk more about how throughout your entire process you're community centric than personal centric. Like I think you talk a lot about your what this does for you in your career, but just remember in the community engagement section, step back away from that just a tad and talk about the community a little more. But that's such a very fine-tuned points on a really strong application. Just remember that this was a really strong application.
Thanks, Nick. Any additional comments on this application?
I also thought this was solid in terms of the amount of detail she put into her explanations. I did have a few questions in the very beginning about the choice of medium, since we are pretty heavily digital right now. From what I gathered from the CD, it's going to be more promotional for the industry versus directly to the public for sale. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about why she chose a CD as her vehicle of reaching people, and also maybe if that would be available during performances so that she could reach more audiences versus just promoters or people that have already supported her work.
Comment. Any additional comments on this application? Okay, hearing none, take a second just to finalize any comments that you have for this application, and we'll move on to the next one. So the next application is, thank you, Chapin, Eliza Maury. And Nick, you are the first reader for this application.
Sorry, I was just pulling it up. So overall, I thought this was a great project and had clear goals. And also was very clear to me how doing this work will impact their career. Just one thing that in the project goals and description section, really make us excited about the work that you're doing. I think you do a lot of great description of your work. But in your first section of describe your main creative work, that's the first time we get to like read your application. So, just one sentence doesn't always provide that excitement or, what gets me excited to like want to give you this funding. So just making sure that you really describe that in your description. Also, I thought, with your resume, and, I think this is probably, take it or leave it advice, but maybe try to create an artistic resume, something that really speaks to the same level of your paintings, which are very beautiful. When it came to the budget, I think you could have had a clearer timeline. Budget narratives are good, but when a reviewer is looking at the application, it's hard to find the dates when it's just a huge paragraph of description. So just making sure that's a little more clear. When it comes to contingencies, just make this budget, it said 500 for contingency and then maybe an extra 100 for business consulting. Just write that as 600. You don't have to get to the super fine-tuned points in that point. Pad the numbers a little, so that way it just looks really clear. When it came to your income, it's always just helpful to describe how you came to that number. Like if it's from sales, making sure that you say that you sold X amount of paintings for X amount of dollars. And then also with in-kind donations, I think this is just a definition. Just remember that, if you're receiving grants from people, that's an income, not a in-kind donation. And then the last thing with community engagement, just for me, it didn't necessarily read as community engagement. It feels more about networking and leveraging your resources and not how you kind of respond to that. So making sure you mention somewhere about how audiences are having a say in this, or how maybe you're fulfilling a community need or providing a much needed service for a community. But other than that, I thought that the artwork that was presented was really fascinating, and it's a really great project for showing how you will develop personally. So just a couple of finer points there would just made it a little stronger.
Thanks, Nick. Next reader for this one is Tira.
Thank you. So Nick pretty much covered it. One thing I wanted to say that I appreciated about this application is the applicant put taxes in their budget. And I know as artists, that is something that is kind of easier to slip our minds. So I thought that was great that they thought that through and included that as part of their budget. With the community engagement portion, I think that this applicant is very invested in engaging with their community of artists. And I think that they kind of have that more in mind and more in focus than engaging with the audience of people who will just be patrons and viewers of their art practice. So I think, just thinking about them a little bit more, and I think Nick said this as well, just what can you give to them, not just in terms of your work, but in terms of like maybe helping them understand your work, helping them really engage with it in the way that you want. That might be able to help fill in some of that patron-centered community engagement.
Thanks, Tara. Any additional comments from other panelists on this application?
I think this would be relevant to both the community engagement and to the resume. I noticed, I think in the narrative, the artist mentioned the desire to develop these online workshops and classes, and that they were an art teacher. So that's very specific, like audience that you're seeking to engage, and you have really strong goals about why you do that. As a teacher, it's a lot of work, and so that could really help perhaps get a more understanding of the community part. And then but in the actual resume, I didn't see that there was much teaching experience listed, and then it wasn't in the section about the artist's creative work. So I thought putting some of that into the narrative and onto the documentation too would help to strengthen the application.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Other comments on this one? Okay, seeing none, take a second to finalize any comments that you've got on this application. Our next one is Jalen Miller, and I'll give folks a second to pull that application up and get it in front of them. All right, Shamira, I have you as first reader for this application.
I thought this was a very thoughtful idea, and word of mouth seemed like a great foundation for reaching people, especially considering the challenges we've had with Facebook and social media recently. I did think, however, that I had a question about how they could continue to ensure that their business would thrive in an intentional way outside of word of mouth, and also just some logistical questions about how they would handle the inventory for the books and manage that aspect of the business. Would they need to continue as a solo artist eventually if they're going to continue to do this and think of this as an income generator? Would they eventually need to hire someone to assist? How all that would look. And for community engagement, I thought it was a wonderful way to honor community, but I wanted to hear more about how the community might benefit and if they've actually expressed a need for this type of project.
Thanks, Shamira. Let's see. Next, I have second reader. I have Rachel. Rachel, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, this was a very interesting project, and you know, the artist, you know, it was the way that they wrote the narrative about it was, I think, at risk but it had that storytelling element. Like at first, you're kind of like, what is this person going to be telling me about? I'm not sure, because they started like in the middle of this story about who they are and how they've come to feel inspired and their reasons behind seeking out to further develop this particular path of storytelling. And so that was a really interesting way that it was done. The main part, I guess, I got into the weeds a little in the feasibility part. I felt like there was a lot going on in this project, and it was not really, the timeline wasn't like very developed in a way that I could really understand the steps that are being taken and how long each step is going to take. And then I also, just the feasibility of the sustainability, as was mentioned, of something of the sort, like the pricing. I don't know if we're supposed to go into that kind of detail, but I thought, you know, $1,000 for interviews and writing just one book is probably way under what the realistic amount of time it would take to do a project like this. So looking at that sustainable model, like if I do want to do this in the future, am I going to find the funding that I need in order to spend so much time to make this really cool detailed book? And then because there was so much work in the process, like I just wondered about, okay, they're going to do 3 books in the timeline, and how much time does it take to collect the information for each book, and do you already have those possible organizations or companies planned out? I just a little, maybe that just kind of had me questioning whether it could all be done within the period of the grant. I think that is the extent of my comments on that.
Thanks, Rachel. Any additional panelist comments on this application?
I'll just say that I thought the communication was one of the strongest parts of this application. And one story that I started to see as they were talking about community engagement is that this project centers around local partnerships and the local economy. And I just wanted to hear more about that, because that is such a strong story, and also one that we haven't seen in a lot of applications. So I just thought that's such a unique story. Make sure you really bring that out, because that could just make your case even stronger.
Thanks, Nick. Additional comments? Okay, hearing none. If you take a second and just finalize any comments you've got on that application. Next applicant, and I'll give you a second to queue it up. Joanna Gorman is our next application for review. So take a second and pull that one up. Thank you, Chicken, keeping us on track. Shamira, you are our first reader for this application.
I thought that the art technique was beautiful and that showed good skill. They know how to use a paintbrush. And I thought that their goals, however, could benefit from being a little bit more narrowed down, which might come through during the painting process, but I would have liked to have heard more in the application. Specifically, like how will they focus the body of work and how will each piece relate to each other? Something that was mentioned in the application was, I think it was in long-term goals, was that language is mentioned. And something that came to mind was that each piece is sort of like part of the sentence that you're communicating. So like what words are each piece communicating in that sentence, so that we have a better idea of what that body of work will look like. Also, how does the medium that you're using reinforce that message? In terms of feasibility, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more detail and specifics within the plan. Something that I would have liked to have known is what MFA programs are you going to apply for? How does that go into your long-term or short-term goals, and how will your work be enhanced by that program, and how will that program be enhanced by your work? Also, something to consider for this particular project when you're using someone else's stories. I thought that thinking about the responsibility of being a steward of someone else's stories, I feel like that's an important thing to consider in the long run. How will you use the models, and how will putting their stories out there impact them as well? So just to consider that, continue to keep in mind that you're doing it compassionately and with respect to their privacy.
Thank you, Shamira. Appreciate those comments. Nick, you are second reader.
Awesome. I agree with a lot of the points that Shamira made. Also on the budget, just making sure that it adds up. I think in this one, it was just $2 off, but just making sure it's absolutely clear that it equally adds up. With the budget narrative, again, just making sure it's really clear because there's a lot of description there, but not like main headers of like what's happening in the timeline. It's very narrative driven. Try to make it a little more concise for us to see those points a little more. Also, I feel like in this person's example, they are making the case for why this project should exist in their budget part, and you've already made that case in your goals and in description. So just making sure that the budget only reveals like the bigger timeline. You don't need to make the case again there. And then I'm just going to echo what Shamira said about the community engagement and being stewards of the work that community is, the stories that you're telling of them. But I think that you have a really good direction of where this is heading.
Thanks, Nick. Any additional comments on this application?
So I had an additional comment. For me, there was a miscommunication between like the goals section and the feasibility budget section. For me, when I was reading the goals, the short-term goals of purchasing materials in order to produce work was very clear to me, but it wasn't clear to me until you get into the feasibility budget section that there was this desire to have an exhibition. So I think going back and reworking the goals section a little bit to make it clear earlier on that the ultimate goal of this project is to produce these works to go in an exhibition would really help tie those two sections in together and make the application as a whole a little bit more cohesive.
Thank you. Thanks, Tara. Any additional comments? Okay, thank you. Take a second and finalize that application if you would. Our next application for review is Lauren Johns. So I'll give you a second to get that one pulled up. I know many of you are dealing with multiple screens and lots going on there behind the scenes. Takes a lot of magic to make this happen, so thank you. Lauren Johns is our next application for review, and Rachel, you are our first reader on that one. Rachel, you're muted.
I have a dog that will bark randomly, so that's why I keep doing that. Okay, in the goals section, this was a case of where I was starting to get really interested, and I thought the artist had a lot to say, but I would have liked to have a little bit more detail about the main creative work, like from the past experience or something that I just felt like a history of past projects would be useful here, or just something to make it more tangible to me. It's about an interior design space, so how is this a great opportunity of you know, using the talents on creating their own space, I think is really awesome and fascinating. But just how they would use their skills that they've already developed creating other people's spaces to really enhance this unique downtown space might make it a little more solid for me, concrete. I also, this was again one of those, wow, it's a huge project, amazing to do a redesign and renovation of downtown building. And I think it's a lot of the groundwork seems to have been established by making the connections with people in the community and understanding some of the breadth of funding that's needed outside of the budget that's being provided through this grant opportunity. But I did think that maybe some of the more like logistics of it weren't quite being addressed. For example, building permits and things that are involved in renovations like that. I didn't know if they were allowed in the timeline, because it says hopefully completed by summer of 2022. And that seemed pretty quick for all of the work that was going to be done. And the community engagement that I found to be a bit underdeveloped in this application. It just kind of mentioned the main connections that the artist has that will be involved directly with the renovation. But part of this is this hope to interact not only with potential clients, but also other artists of interior design in the area. So in the community engagement section, there's room to expand on how this is going to be a space that helps make those goals happen, but it isn't really there right now. And I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Rachel. Nick, you are second reader on this one.
Yeah, I agreed a lot of what Rachel said. I think one of the strongest points on this application is how this specific project, hold on one session. My session is not expiring. Everything relating to this project and just this one, at this one point in time, was clear to me. The things that I wanted to know more about was, how does this connect to your long-term goals? Does this connect to your unique value proposition? Those details could have been a little more described for me. I thought as it relates to the budget, it was a very good example of like the budget is $10,000, and usually when you see a big amount of money, you get a little worried about some of the smaller funding. But it's very clear to me like that this is a $10,000 project, and you need this $2,000 to contribute to this. So I just thought this is one of those examples of a big budget that people can really get behind. And then I just agree with the community engagement. One thing that I got really excited about when I was reading the application was that you talk about how your design firm is going to house a collective of design professionals. And I wanted to read more about that in the community engagement section, but didn't get to. So really use the community engagement space to talk about the impact this is going to have, or how the town is participating. And so just remember that community engagement is a two-way communication, and that the community and the creative is a part of your community engagement.
Great. Thanks, Nick. Any additional comments from panelists on this application?
I thought that it was very interesting that this person chose to do a facade versus like a visual art. And I thought it would have been beneficial to include some photos in their application so that we could actually see what they were working with. Also, why is this project beneficial to the corridor downtown, and how will that impact the engagement with the surrounding community? I think it could have been beneficial to further explain how their business could support the upgrade in the space. Although a lot of people are thriving during the past 2 years, there are also a lot of storefronts that are closing. So I thought it could be beneficial to explain a little bit more about why they chose this avenue. Also, I think I had something about, again, how for community engagement, how could it impact the downtown area, but also the history of the location. If this is an older storefront, what's the age of the storefront? How can that impact the story of what you're doing?
Great. Thank you, Shamira. Any additional comments on that one?
Just to, I think, a clarifying point, and Shamira, if I'm misquoting you, just let me know. I think when she was talking about the like the work samples and everything, you have a beautiful portfolio of what you've done in the past, at least on the website that you provided to us. But correct me if I'm wrong, Shamira, and this is my feeling as well, but I wanted to see more what the project visually is going to look like. So not necessarily seeing some of your past work for what this work is going to do.
Exactly.
But again,
yeah,
beautiful past works.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments on this one? Okay, take a couple of seconds, please, to finalize your scores. Now we've got 4 more applications to review. Happy to take a stretch break for 5 minutes if we want. I'm looking for heads to indicate whether or not that feels like a good thing. I see some slide head nodding. So you know what? I'm going to make an executive decision here and say we're going to take 5 minutes. We'll be back at 2:36. No, I believe, Chapin, unless I'm wrong, that we will continue broadcasting on YouTube during your break. So we will come back in 5 minutes and power through the last 4 applications. So everybody take 5 and we'll see you back here in a sec. Chapin, are we all back?
I don't see Rachel yet, but oh, there she is. JK.
All right, so we're all back?
Indeed.
All right,
So.
thank you. Thank you, Chapin. Thanks, everyone. We're back. We are now on the application for Maxine Keep Philip Drury. Tiara, you're the first reader on this one.
All right, so this is a very ambitious application. There's a lot that the applicant wants to achieve with the project. In the goals section, I think that some things that I was interested in knowing were how many copies of each game they plan to make and sell. And I was also really interested in knowing, it's stated quite a few times that this is a team project. There are other people, what the applicant's role is, and maybe even the other people in the development process of these games, kind of how that works out. I think that could add a little bit more clarity. And a little bit more information about what development is already underway. So us as a reviewer kind of have more of a clear view of what has been done and what there is left to be done, since both games are stated to be in development. And that plays a part in the timeline portion. So looking at the timeline in the application, it is a little bit confusing. We have January to August as the project itself. That's the timeline in which they want to get that finished. May through August are the housing dates, and then there's some additional dates provided in September, while the project's listed to end in August. So I think kind of just, going back into that and seeing, where things aren't adding up could be helpful, and us knowing a little clearer view of the timeline. And in the budget section, let's see, there is some issues with the total projected cash income and the total projected cash expenses. They should be the same number. So just going back and kind of double checking, doing like all those little proofreading things will really help this application out. Yeah, just those little things to correct in that. I also, in the budgeting section, was interested in, since materials aren't a main source of where the funding's going to go, seeing more, what you provided in terms of materials listed under that in the budget section would be helpful to get a better picture kind of all of the funds that have gone into this project. Let's see. Moving on down to community engagement. I appreciate that, you feel that you have answered these questions earlier in the application, but responding to these last two questions is important for us as like the reviewers to really get an understanding of how your project relates to the community. And how your project is going to help you with your community engagement, and kind of just wraps everything up, ties it all together. So going back and answering those questions would definitely be appreciated and help out this application. But yeah, it seems like it's very ambitious, and just going in and giving this application a second go, re-looking over what you've already written, doing all that proofreading, and then just really finishing out the application with the community engagement portion seems like the next steps for this.
Thank you. Thanks, Tiara. Shamira, you are the next reviewer on this one.
I thought this sounded like a very exciting project, and it reminded me of games we played in grade school, like Oregon Trail and Word Munchers. So I wanted to hear more about the specifics of the subject matter they were going to approach. They talked a bit about how it would impact the students, but I wanted to hear more about, like, specifically how is math, language, and situational learning going to be applied if they're that far into development. Let me see. For feasibility, I wanted to hear more about how they would reach their audience after they've done the focus group, and what kind of technological maintenance would the project require once it is developed. Also, how will they continue to engage their audiences after the project has been created?
That's great, Shamira. Thank you. Additional comments from panelists on this application?
I have one as it relates to the budget. Just something, I guess, as a word of caution for the applicant is you talk a lot about overhead costs, and just know that depending on who you try to receive funding for, that might deter them from wanting to fund you. I think in this application, if you talked more about more like how you're paying yourself, like if you're paying yourself $15 an hour, working X amount of hours, that makes it a little more clear of me as a person who's giving a grant to, like, oh, now I know how much they're actually working for. But just kind of just a word of caution just with overhead, especially as it relates to like business grants or something. Focusing more on the project and less about you might make that transition a little easier.
Right. Thank you, Nick. Any other comments on that one, on this application?
There is one thing I forgot to mention that I'll just take a minute and go back and mention. For the work samples, there was samples of video games, there was samples of comics, and then there were two maps that the last map mentioned specifically its relation to the board game. So I'm going to make the assumption that the first one is as well. But I do think that since the project is focused on a video game and a board game that are in development, maybe swapping out those images for comics with a couple more board game pieces would really help us to kind of see the development that has already occurred.
Okay. Thank you, Tiara. Any other comments? Good conversation around this application. Okay, seeing none or hearing none, take a second to finalize this application and pull up the next application, Melissa Parrott Quimby. All right, Nick, you are first reader on this application.
Yeah, I thought this is a good application, and how this relates to the project in this one moment was very clear. Something I would encourage the applicant to write more about is more about their long-term, like how this project will progress towards your long-term career goals, or what is that long-term creative. You kind of do it in 1 to 2 sentences, which is concise, but this is kind of your opportunity for us to get to know you more and get us excited about your project and get us excited about you. So really think big picture when you get to those areas. As it relates to the budget, I appreciate how finely detailed this all is, but just know with budgets, you don't have to be like exact of like, that's gut kill, if I said that correctly, is $292.01. You could just put 300. A person reviewing is not going to be that very closely looking at it. Just keep it, pad the number just a little there. Also for income, it'd be great to know like how you're getting your artwork sales, like you're selling X amount of paintings for X amount of dollars to reach X amount of money. And then finally, with community engagement, I just encourage the applicant to think about how the community can participate in your creative making process, or show how you're identifying community needs or gaps kind of at the moment, it looks like you're just networking, which, is good, but trying to find that two-way communication and not just one way, which is how I read it. But again, building towards that.
Thanks, Nick. Shamira, you are our second reader on this one.
I thought this application could benefit from more explanation into why they are going back to clay. It sounded like it's an area that they're familiar with, but I wanted to know what would happen with the other mediums and would everything coexist at some point? Or has the artist learned more conceptual information from working in all of those mediums that's informing their clay practice? Also, I wanted to know more about what they meant by specific moments in time, which is something they described in describing how they interact with nature. Let me see. I also wanted to know, in terms of feasibility, how many pieces would entail the new body of work, or would that process be more organic? Sometimes you edit down when you go, but I thought it could be helpful to spell that out a bit more. And also, are there other opportunities aside from exhibitions that could lead to engagement? And how will the community benefit from the new work, and what impressions is the work leaving on patrons and viewers?
Thank you, Shamira. Any additional panelist comments on this application? Thoughts or comments? All right. Well, hearing none, if you take a second to finalize your comments on this application. Our next two applications, Shamira Wilson has a conflict of interest, so we are going to put her in the waiting room while we discuss these next two applications. And so, thank you, Chapin. Next application is Theresa Vasquez. Rachel, you're the first reader on that one.
Okay, thank you. Pulling that up here. I enjoyed reading the section here about the artist's work, and they included a lot of great detail about the recent professional history and the current artwork, and how these things are creating a cohesive direction. That helped me to understand when I got to the goals section, like how it's all coming together and why, and how that makes sense, and how this is the next step. There was, it seemed well planned out with the broader long-term goals and the specific short-term goals were working together in that way for me. And then, I enjoyed the specifics. Like sometimes there's not enough concrete detail. I've mentioned that before. So this one I felt like really had some specific details and specific points that the artist was sure to get across that helped me understand the direction and the why. In the feasibility, there was, again, good detail put in to the tasks that need to be completed, and there was already some work done in terms of knowing certain places and relationships that are being built upon to help achieve these goals. The only comment I really had was that there was the in-kind mentioned here, which I wasn't sure whether it was necessary. There's certain things about in-kind that can get weird. So I don't know if that was especially necessary in the actual budget of the project, since it didn't seem quite relevant to the narrative, but or it wasn't mentioned there, so I wasn't sure what that had to do. And then the community engagement I thought was really well thought out, and it definitely seemed to be speaking about both personal relationships and other relationships with the guilds. And this person is, and then as an educator, this person is very deep with the community and is really looking for ways that they can develop relationships in the community to support their art, but also support the art or support the community with their art. A lot, I mean, just a lot of thought, I thought really went into all of the sections, which I appreciated. I think that's all I have for that.
Thanks, Rachel. Tara, you are second reader on this one.
All right, so this application, the applicant has a lot of goals, ranging from, you know, smaller sequential goals to pretty big goals. And I think that they give us a lot of information, and that a good like once over of the application and maybe condensing down some of that information would be helpful. As a reviewer, I kind of get caught up in all the different like smaller goals and lose a little bit of the sight of how they all connect in the bigger picture. So I think just going through and condensing it down a little bit would be helpful. And then in terms of the feasibility and budget section of the application, I noted that under the budget, travel and accommodations are listed as an expense, but we don't really get a clear explanation of where the travel and accommodations play into the project, like at what point are they happening? So seeing that after reading, you know, the previous parts of the project, I was a little bit confused as where that was coming in. So I think an explanation of that would just help make it a little bit more clear. But that was really the main things that I had to note in this, just kind of going back, rereading, and kind of tightening up the application a little bit.
Great, thank you, Tara. Any additional comments on this one?
Just agreeing what Tara said about tightening up, and if it helps for the applicant, what I wrote down is, you know, when you think about your big picture, keep those big and aspirational, and then when we get to the specific goals, make sure those are clear cut and those are very tangible.
Great, good. Any other comments? Yeah, Ailey.
I had a note in my my own notes about an in-kind discrepancy. Is that true? Did we address that, or am I making that up?
Anybody see that? No, make note of that in their review.
I just mentioned that I wasn't sure if it was, it wasn't in the budget, so I wasn't sure where it related to what was going on.
Thank you. I just didn't connect those two ideas. Got it now. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks, Ailey. Thanks, Rachel. Any other comments on this application? Okay, seeing and hearing none, take a second if you would and finalize this application. And then our next application for review, thank you, Chapin, is you have Sarah Tab. If you could take a second, please, to pull that application up. And just as a reminder, Shamira Wilson has a conflict of interest and she will be out for the review of this application. Okay, first reader on this one is Rachel.
Okay. This application was interesting. It had a lot going on in it. I believe this was, I got a little confused in what was going on, like whether it was for individual exhibits or it was for curating exhibits. So I guess mainly I was looking for a little more direction in the narrative to help me understand through a few more concrete elements, whether this was for individual work or for a collective work. And that went into the artist sample too. I think eventually I realized there was some information about audio recordings and woodblock printing, but I think I found that in the timeline section, but I didn't necessarily see it in the goals of this project section. That could have helped me get where I needed to go mentally quicker if it had been in there. She does mention the recording. Sorry, I have a lot of notes on this one, so I'm like, why? Okay. Then in the budget, there were also some discrepancies about the income and expense, where the income was greater than the total expense listed. Sorry guys, my husband got on a meeting at the same time. It's a little distracting.
No, no worries.
So yeah, so this was the community engagement. There was the 10 members that they were going to find in the community that would help them. But I wondered beyond that, it seemed like a really important project, and I really appreciated that idea. But how was it going to be reaching that final step and going out into the world, just from the artist's perspective? I thought that in the goals section, if it was condensed down a little to make it more specific just to understanding that part, like the hopes for this one project instead of like the general hope for, there was a lot about emotions and things. I don't know. I was feeling like the professional element might be missing from the goals in here. That's all I have for now. The next speaker.
Yeah, that's fine. Totally fine. Nick, you are second reader. Want to jump in?
Yeah, I agree that this project has a lot of heart to it, and I do really appreciate that aspect. I think I just could have used the tangible aspect, and I think one thing I inferred from this reading is that this person is very early in their career, and figuring out how to do something like this will definitely really help them build upon their future career as they work towards being an independent artist. Another thing on the budget, again, just as Rachel said, make sure it adds up, but also make sure you have a timeline listed of when you hope this project will get done, just because I don't think I knew when this project is happening. And then the final aspect is just with community engagement. You're having these conversations with community members to inspire your work, which is really great. And at the heart of what community engagement, I think, is. One thing that just could have made it stronger is how will you ensure that the community that is engaged with is still being engaged after the creation of the work? Are you going to be doing workshops? Are you going to be doing mental health exercises? Because since this relates to trauma, to me, that might be an aspect of the work. So just making sure community engagement is seen throughout the entirety of your project. But again, I think that your community engagement part is really strong with these conversations.
Thanks, Nick. Any additional comments on this application that I'd like to share?
Yes.
Great.
So for this project, in the goals section, the project goal seems to be an exhibition, the kind of ultimate goal. But in the feasibility section and the budget section, there is no mention of a space to display this artwork and have this experience. So I think kind of looking into how that plays, especially kind of listing the space in the budget section, you know, are you going to partner with some organization that's going to allow you to inhabit that space for, you know, whatever that period of time is for free? Is that going to be something that you pay for? Just having that bit of information would help with the feasibility from a reviewer's perspective. And then in the projected cash income section, there's an amount for paper making supplies, and there's an amount for paper for printing. And to me, as like reviewing it, it was just kind of curious. I'm like, okay, so you're making paper and printing on different paper, which is absolutely completely fine. But I think just a little bit of an explanation somewhere in there about, you know, your paper making versus the other type of paper you'll be using in your project or something like that will just give a little bit of clarity to why, you know, we're seeing those two separate amounts. And those are all my comments.
Hey, thanks, Tara. Any other comments from panelists? Okay, seeing and hearing none. Take a second, if you could, to finalize comments on this application. And with that, Chapin, if you would bring Shamira Wilson back in. Welcome back, Shamira.
Thank you.
This concludes this public panel review for the Marion cohort for on-ramp FY22. So panelists, if you are able to hang on after we leave YouTube for just a couple of minutes, we'd love to talk with you. But thank you so much to the panelists for all your hard work in reviewing and your great care and thoughtfulness in commenting on these applications. And to our applicants, great work. We're really excited to see these projects come to life. So with that, Chapin, if you take us out, and panelists hang on, and then we'll talk for a couple of minutes afterwards. Have a good afternoon, everyone.